Hi guys, TJ here. Welcome to Covering 101. You guys have been asking about this, how you cover with tissue and dope, but we'll be talking about a little bit more than tissue and dope in this part of the video. This is all going to be chalk talk, so I apologize in advance if it gets a little bit boring. In this case, we're going to be doing a vintage performance top flight streak reproduction. Nice basic profile, great for beginners. Both builders and flyers. These things are pretty sturdy, and I apologize if you can hear my dog grumbling in the background. She thinks all attention should be hers at all times. So, anyways, covering 101, finishing. When I say finishing, I mean, covering the model, giving its paint scheme, everything down that road. So why do we finish? Why? Well, first, obviously makes it look pretty. Lucy, get away from the tripod. That's a given. So we just kind of put that off to the side. We want it to look pretty. Not saying that a plane that's sitting there just in the raw bones, all ready for covering, isn't a beautiful sight. They are, especially when somebody's taking their time and they don't have fill all over the place. Little nicks from their fingernails down inside the wood, and that had to get filled. But yeah, so plane isn't a plane without looking snazzy or scale, whatever your choice may be. The other one is Lucy. Stop. The other one is strength. If you think of how a wing is built, all right, and you got a couple of ribs going that way, you got a spar, depending on the way your particular wing is built, you might have some sheeting in the front making it a D-tube, ivy lanes, all that. But when you look down the side of a wing, you got your airfoil, all right, and you get a spar on top and bottom or through the middle, again, however it's designed, get a trailing edge. And again, there might be sheeting on the top, but there's nothing locking all of this together, so you can twist the wing back and forth, side to side. You can torque it. Same as for sheet components. Let's say we'll draw flight streak rudders since we're building and finishing a flight streak here. Look kind of something like that. On the end, wood grain kind of goes like that. And you get a little bit on a bias, and you go flat, and the wood grain itself, yeah, that helps tighten everything up. But when we apply tissue and dope, monocoat, whatever, over the top of this, it locks everything together. And if you're covering with tissue and dope like we are, you've got the lacquer, what dope is essentially lacquer, in it as well. So not only do you have the strength of the tissue, the paper, which is shockingly strong, but when you add the dope into it, the dope doesn't want to stretch or move either, even though it kind of does remain flexible over time. Just everything dries and shrinks up together and creates a much firmer structure. Same goes with the body, the elevator, the horizontal stab. The whole assembly is locked together. Before you cover your wing, go ahead and I'll show us on a video later, but grab each wingtip and just twist it side to side like this. You'll see the whole wing move. When you're done, you try to do it, you'll just feel it's a whole lot tighter. We also cover to fuel-proof everything. The dope is a fuel-proof mixture, butyrate, not nitrate. This will all be butyrate dope. That's fuel-proof to help seal the wood and also seal the covering, so oils and nitrate, they can't soak down into the structure and eventually attack your glue joints, and the whole thing will fall apart or weigh a ton because it's just sitting there absorbing oil and doing nothing else. And also to seal the open structures. Between each of these, when air is going over this, if there's nothing between each of these ribs, well, each rib is really the only lifting surface, and it doesn't do anything. There's just not enough lift generated from a skinny little 16th inch rib trying to give you lift. So you cover the whole surface, and all of a sudden, well, now all this is doing work, and all this is doing work, and that allows sufficient lift to be generated in the end. Plus, the whole thing will be smooth, less drag. Speed ships, You know, you see them a lot of times, really nice smooth paint jobs. They go through a lot of time sealing all the edges, the gaps to get rid of turbulence. Stunt guys, it's like looking through sheets of glass on their planes when they're in appearance judging. Even Formula One cars, all of them, man, they're all smooth, no drag. So how do we achieve all of this? Well, when we're covering, we've got, we'll call them two broad examples. We've got film type coverings, and we have, we'll call them, what do we want to call them? Call them painted substrates. Okay, your films. Your film is your coverings like you know, the ever popular monocoat, ultra coat, and these all shrink. Well, they have the film and then there's adhesive on them as well. So we have, you know, the nice shiny film, and then on the bottom of them there's actually a little bit of adhesive, and this is heat activated. So what happens is you lay it down on the structure and you use a heat iron and a heat gun. Heat gun. And you use the iron all around the perimeter of your edges. All around the perimeter of whatever component you're doing. And then once you get the edges all done and you have the film stretched out as tight as you can, use your heat gun and go over it, and it shrinks the whole thing up drum tight. I'm in the process of also putting together a Brodak Pathfinder ARF as a practice plane, so I'll show you guys that a little bit later, how that all works out. But that's not the whole point of this video. And film on top of that, film tends to be heavy. If you look at charts, they're available. Helps if I can write nice. When you look at them per unit volume, the films tend to be very heavy. Not necessarily a bad thing, because some people also feel that it tends to be faster. And it also tends to be a little cheaper. Yeah, I mean, it might only be $8 a roll for the stuff, or $10, whatever the case may be. But you know, if you want multiple colors on your plane, you need to have multiple rolls of film. Even if you only need, you know, a piece, you know, the size of a piece of paper, you wind up buying, you know, an entire 6-foot roll of stuff, and that can make some designs get very expensive very quickly. And going back to faster, personally, I can't monocoat to save my life. I just can't do it. But some guys feel it's a lot quicker. You know, just go around the edges, you're done. And you know, with tissue and dope, you're applying layer after layer after layer, sanding it, layers, all that. So yeah, I mean, I can monocoat a plane quicker than I can a tissue and dope one, but I think it's a lot more work that actually goes into a monocoat or a film type finish than a tissue and dope type finish, and that's just because I'm not good at it, probably. I can't make a wingtip to save my life. A canopy, like even a simple canopy like what's our flight streak, I can't get it to turn edges nice and pretty. I have no problems admitting my own limitations. Then we go from this and we go to the painted substrate. Now, even inside here, there are a lot of little subcategories. You know, we've got fiberglass, tissue, and there's different types of tissue as well. Polyspan and silkspan are the big players in this style of finishing. We'll go through one by one. Fiberglass. Fiberglass will not work on open structures. Yeah, like between rib to rib. Right? Because the resin that you're putting through the fiberglass needs something to stick to it. It's also really heavy. So if you're trying to fiberglass, let me start the page here. I know my handwriting sucks. I'm sorry. So you've got fiberglass, and when you look down the side of the fiberglass, it's a woven fiber, just like any other kind of cloth is. Carbon fiber, they're all woven cloth. And also, like I was saying, when you're doing fiberglass, it needs epoxy. This isn't, like your 5-minute epoxy they use for tacking together little things, or your 15, 30-minute use to glue everything together. It's usually a finishing resin. Z-epoxy, theirs is nice and easy to use. The West 2000, that's nice and easy to use as well, and they're both very strong. But like I was saying before, open structures don't fly. And that comes from, you can't get it tight enough and to sit there in order to be able to maintain its rigidity under operating conditions. And you'll also probably find that, if we look at a wing head-on, and we've got our leading edge, and you got a couple of ribs. When you try to put this fiberglass over the top, well, it's just, I do that different color. It's just going to droop down between each of the ribs a lot, and then you're only going to have, these tiny little spots right here. That's all it's holding the fiberglass. Well, between it drooping down and not being able to firm up and pull tight like other styles can, and only having these little attachment points, it just a disaster. So fiberglass is just a no-go for what we're doing here. If you wanted to do a closed structure, we'll call it, or solid, like your fuselage, your tails, canopy, things like that, you can do it. Absolutely, no problem. Done right, fiberglass finishes can be very light, on racers. Fiberglass, the outside is typically, standard procedure. Scale guys use it a lot. But in the stud, it's really kind of only as a kind of reinforcement over certain areas. A lot of guys like to fiberglass their noses, maybe their wing joints, areas that will see a lot of stress throughout the course of whatever discipline you're doing. Stunt, speed, scale, racing, combat, whatever. A lot of guys also tend to say that this is a very heavy finish, and they're not necessarily wrong. There's different weights of cloth, 3/4 ounce cloth, 1 ounce cloth, ounce and a half cloth that you can use. But then also, it's really easy to leave too much resin on the cloth, the fiberglass cloth. And the other issue is also your wood structure. If you sit there and you just paint the resin onto the wood, and then try and stick your cloth down, well, the wood, if we look at our wood, surface of your wood zoomed way in, even after finishing, still looks like that. We'll say that's 320 grit scratches zoomed way in. Well, if you go to brush on a layer of epoxy, of course you're filling all that in too, but it soaks down and into the wood. So the best way you gotta do this is you actually coat the cloth first and then put it on, trying to eliminate a lot of this. Some guys will dope their airframes first, let it gas out for a couple of weeks, and then go on trying to eliminate as much of the seepage as possible. But also, if we go back up here, when we do finally apply the cloth, and you put it on once and you let it dry, and you think it's nice and flat. Well, it's really not. If you didn't scrape everything off, if you were to zoom in on it, the surface is there, and then your fiberglass maybe down here if you didn't scrape it right. Well, everything inside here is extra material. It's not doing anything. It's not adding any strength. It's not making a better finish. It's not doing anything other than adding weight. So you got to sand all this down again, scrape it off enough. And then even after you sand it down, well, then you put on a second coat. And then the second coat of your resin might wind up like that. Well, you got to sand it all down again. And certain finishing resins do sand very nicely. They just powder off. But it's still harder than dope. So if you're not careful doing this, it's a very labor-intensive process. I wouldn't recommend it for a first-time finisher. But if you're doing a plane that's all sheet, so you got like a little Buster or Cosmic Wind or something like that with a 15, and you want to try and fiberglass it instead of tissue and doping, go for it. Try it. Worst you're going to do is have more stuff to sand off, and it's kind of like a welder doesn't know how to weld. And the weld may still hold, but you're going to be grinding to make it look nice and pretty. So fiberglass is done. Now we're going to finally go on to the dope portion of this. A lot of guys just call it tissue and dope. Tissue and dope. Now we're saying, there's polyspan, silk span. This is what we'll be using, silk span. And you got tissue, real silk. These are major players. Polyspan, this is kind of a hybrid. And by hybrid, what I mean is you still put it on with dope. You prep your surface with dope, and then you put it on around the edges with dope. But you can heat shrink polyspan. It's heavier than silk span and tissue, but you can heat shrink it to really easily get a very nice, tight structure. Again, going back to our wing outline, you got your leading edge, and we got a couple of ribs. You put it on, and there's very little droop between each side, even after tightening. It always has to droop a little bit. It's never going to be dead flat in an open base situation, but it draws itself together and puts the whole structure in compression. It also, like I said, it does also tend to be a little heavier, and I found that the opening, it's still a fabric, so it still has a definite weave and a grain to it. This tends to be a little bit more open or coarse with polyspan than with other finishing methods. So that means you got to apply more coats in order to fill it. Silk span and tissue, we'll be using Brodax silk span. It is a kind of plastic. I don't know if I should say plastic or not. Yeah, I guess so. Plastic, cotton, synthetic kind of material, but also tends to be very light. Depending on the grade. There's different thicknesses of it, and during the actual covering portion, I'm going to be using light and medium. And that has to do with, obviously, the weight, but also just the overall strength and structure of the material. The medium tends to be a lot stronger than the thin, or the light. But the light is lighter, and we're always concerned about weight. We don't want to be flying some 50-ounce flight streak. It's not going to even get off the ground. And it's all application specific. You can cover an entire plane in light by all means. It's not going to hurt it. But it's a lot more challenging of a material to use because there's not a lot of room for error when we go through and sand coats. It's really easy to burn through. It's not very durable in the sense that it's very easy to poke a hole in it. You can drop a pen out of your shirt pocket and it'll go right through it. Medium's a little bit more durable. Again, there's more material there, so it's a lot stronger. we'll be using medium on the wing for the open bays, and because honestly that's where you're handling it most of the time, where you're trying to start it, your guy's getting ready to launch it for you, and also the wing can go through a beating too, so we're going to make sure that's good and strong. Everything else is going to be light because we have the structure of the wood there to hold everything together, and we're just trying to create a good foundation for a finish. Silk is the real old-fashioned one. It's just gotten so expensive for good silk. A lot of guys don't use it anymore. Some guys do. Some guys love it, and they have no problem with the money. I'm not going to use it because I don't like spending a lot of money. I'm not going to lie. So that's where that is. And I'm just looking at my notes here. Okay, so how does tissue and dope work? Well, just like our fiberglass and pretty much any other finishing system that we're concerned with other than monocoat, it's not all of these, the tissue and dope parts, they all have a grain to them. They're not a proper cloth, we'll say, where, you know, like your t-shirts or fiberglass, things like that, where it's all a nice, neatly ordered checkerboard pattern like this. But it does tend to be a little random, but each one does have a grain to it. And we'll get back to why the grain is important. But what we're trying to do here, I'm going to grab another color marker. So we have our wood surface below. You know, again, we're going to pretend that this is all finished with 320 grit, and we're zoomed in really tight, so close that you can see the grain of the material. You can even see your small sand scratches and grains in the wood. So when we're applying anything to this, the whole goal is, one, get everything flat, so that way we get that nice, super shiny, slick looking plane. But also, each one of these little mountaintops is a stress riser, so it actually helps in the long run with stress too. So what have we done? To start this finish, first thing we did, we put on 3 to 5 coats of dope over the wood. Alright, we're trying to flatten the wood out. And what also winds up happening is, after this first coat, well, I'll say first 3 coats, I'll always put 3 coats of dope on the raw wood first. That's step 1 when I'm ready for finishing. And what's happening there is, one, we're trying to seal this in, or else trying to fill this grain. But what also happens is the wood will swell a little bit. So you know, it might look a little bit something like that if you were to zoom way in on it. Well, there's always mountaintops too. There, mountaintops. So, alright, what have we done now? What do we need to do? First thing we need to do is sand this raw wood again. You know, get rid of this dope, because now, not only is the wood swollen a little bit, but we got a bunch of material also sitting on top. You know, so if we were to zoom in and look at the dope, it looks like that. First thing we gotta do is get that flat again. Alright, so not gonna, you know, we got a couple little valleys, things like that. And then we got just this really tight little skim coating of dope over the top again. In a perfect world, you're probably going to break through in a bunch of spots. When you give it this first sand, that's fine. Perfect. If you're not breaking through in a couple of areas, you're not sanding enough off. Because right now, all we want to produce is a flat finish on the wood. We don't want a mountain of material up here. Because, yeah, I mean, all this dope up here, this won't be doing anything. This is bad. This is good. So we've sanded that off, we've broken through in a few spots. So now we've put on another, I always do 3 coats and sand it off. You go through. You might have to do this a few times. It all depends how good your initial work was. So it's always 3 coats, sand. 3 coats, sand. And this just goes on and on and on and on and on until you're satisfied with how flat your wood is. When the wood is ready, it feels nice and smooth. You'll be able to, if you just take a piece of, after you sand it, sand a little portion of your wood. You rub on one side, it'll be nice and smooth. The other side, it'll still feel just a little rough. It still feels good, but it's just a little rough. And you can be able to hear it too. So we've gotten our wood flat. All right, so now we need to put the tissue on our nice flat wood. So, yeah, right there. And then we've got our dope layer just hugging that wood. And then, because we broke through in a bunch of spots, we had knocked off those mountaintops we were talking about. All right, all these mountaintops, all that. This is how our wood looked at first. Now we're here, and there's just an absolute minimum amount of dope on the whole structure. Because again, the dope's heavy. You're running out of time to save weight. You've actually already ran out of time. Now you're just trying to keep the additional weight down to the minimum. While this does provide a certain amount of strength, more doesn't make it stronger. It just does nothing but add weight to it. And added weight is added energy. When it hits the ground, that means bigger boom. Back to what we were talking about. I digress. So we've got this nice, tight. The wood's got real nice shimmer to it. We went over it one more time with 320 just to make sure everything's nice and flat. Absolute minimum amount of product on it. Well, now we come in and we mess up the show a little bit with our tissue, which is what's adding the strength. That's our tissue. Well, we're back to where we started on square one. Not to scale. Not to scale. So, what do? We put dope on. We're back to 3 coats on, 3 coats off. And same thing, we're trying to fill in all this area, all this in here, with as little product as possible. So we went through, we got our first 3 coats on. And back down underneath our nice flat wood. That nice tight skim coat of dope. And we got our paper. Alright, and after our first 3 coats, it may very well be something kind of like that. Ideally, at least you'll be up and over the top of everything, but you might be going through the middle. That doesn't matter. So what do? We sand it. Again, lots of sanding. That's okay. It's great to watch TV and sand. Again, we got our wood layer. We got our dope and our tissue. I gotta stop drawing a big wavy line. We're just gonna go a straight line for our tissue now. Tissue, and then we got, our dope, and looks kind of like that after we brushed it. All sorts of junk might be in there, dust settling down from the air. You get bristles out of your brush tend to fall out. I think I found good brushes finally that are really cheap, and I'll let you guys know at the very end if they're go again or not. But the bane of your existence is the little bristles coming out of the brush, and it's just a nightmare. So what do we got to do now? Like I said, more sanding. All this stuff up here isn't doing anything but adding weight. And again, just like before, if you break through in a couple of spots, you'll be able to hear it, you'll be able to see it, and you'll also be able to feel it, because you'll feel the paper itself. And if you go far enough and break through all the way down into the wood, if it's a really small area, not necessarily a bad thing. If you go through a wing bay or something like that in a corner, and we'll just look at the fight streak plan. You know, if you break through in an edge, you know, right in here, which is where you will always break through. It's always going to be in a tiny little corner right next to an edge. I'll go over later with the model itself certain ways to help prevent that down your finishing road. But you know, if you break through in an open spot like this, you got to put a little piece of tissue over it and blend it all in and make it look pretty again, because if there's rip there, it's just going to progress, and your first flight will just be bad. You do it on a flat surface, like say up over the top of your canopy or something like that. Feather it in, put a couple more coats of dope over it. No, feather it in again. That's not a huge concern right through there. After you put, whether you silver it or you primer it, or however you go through to make your errors stand out, because you'll think this thing looks great sitting there in tissue. You think it'll look awesome, and then you'll spray your first coat of primer or silver on it, and man, your heart's just going to sink. You're going to think it looks like a pile, but it gets better. Okay, so we got that. We sand it again. Our wood. Tight little coat of dope. Our paper. And then another tight coat over the top. This is what we're going for. We want each layer winds up progressively flattening things out. Again, if we were to zoom in closer on this, you know, let's say that's the entire wing, and we're just looking at it, standing back, looking at it, it's like, oh man, it looks flat. All right, let's look at this little tiny portion. It still looks like this. I mean, I don't want to give any illusions that down at the small level of what's going on. And we got that, and there might be a couple little high points from the dope in there. Maybe there's a couple little pieces of wood grain sticking up through. And then we got our tissue. And then we've got dope over the top of that. Alright, so we zoom in. It still looks like hell if you zoom into it, but and there are some sand scratches in your dope too if you zoom in really, really close. So now we got this whole thing: wood, dope, tissue, dope. That's the build-up so far, and all the dope we're using is clear dope up to this point. And in my case, I only use butyrate. There's two different types. There's butyrate and nitrate dope. Some guys love nitrate. They say it's stickier. It helps easier with the lower foundation layers, and then they switch over to butyrate for the final finish, because butyrate is fuel proof. Well, I shouldn't say fuel proof. It's fuel resistant. It's good up to about 10%, maybe 15 on a good day. And this is exhaust. All right, when they say hot fuel resistant, they mean exhaust. Why they call that hot fuel, I don't know. I mean, hot fuel would be like 50% nitro, but hot fuel. But if you put raw fuel on it, especially higher nitro levels, it stains it, it goes right through it, it just turns it into a nasty mush, and you'll like literally wipe it off, and it looks bad. It is a downfall of dope, but dope looks better, and I think this is much easier anyways. Just take care of your stuff and you won't have an issue with it. Plain and simple. Don't be sloppy. Be me. Okay, yeah. We're using clear dope for all this. Clear butyrate. So now we do colors. Well, we don't do colors. Now we do primers. Primers. And how do we want to call this? Because man, it's gonna help if I can write. Primers. The point of a primer is to level your surface. It's not there to add any pretty looks or anything like that. It creates a pretty look, doesn't add a pretty look, if that makes any sense. Because right now, we're going to only look from tissue above now. We know everything below what that looks like. So, we've got our sanded tissue. And we've got our dope on top of it. But there's still itty bitty little small errors in our dope. But it's as tight down to the paper as we can get it. But there's still sand scratches in it. And this thing will feel beautiful running your hands over it. I promise you. It's just going to feel gorgeous. The problem is all the stuff that's too small to feel, or it's in such a large area that you don't necessarily feel it. A big low spot. Let's say down the size of your fuse, looking down the side, we got a profile plane, and we're looking at this profile plane from the top down. One side of the fuse, well, let's say that you got that nice and straight, but there might be, we come down, might just be a little tiny low spot beside your fuse. And you can't feel that running your hands up the side because it might be essentially longer than the stroke of your hand. So it goes down, you don't feel it. And for it to be very noticeable, it would have to be very deep. So you actually feel your hand go down into it and come up and out of it. For the point of this, because especially on a profile where you got flat sides you can work with, you can use a sanding bar to go over from side to side. So when we're sanding, we've got this flat sanding bar goes over it. Well, the whole point of the primer, it's a little thicker. It's also a different color, so it highlights it. That's the important part here. Let me grab a pen for primer. That's different enough. All right. So what winds up happening is we go over with that bar. Oh, there's a whole bunch of dope still left in the bottom of that hole. Because in this case, we're going to use silver dope as our primer. Some guys say it causes delamination and it's too heavy and this and that, and blah, 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 all sorts of stuff. Well, don't put a ton of freaking material on it. Make sure that everything is good first. This should feel gorgeous before even thinking about putting primer on. If you're running your hand down and it still feels like a piece of paper, put another 3 coats of dope on it and sand it again. If it doesn't feel right, it's not right. Go talk with body guys, things like that, and they'll tell you it's going to look great to your eyes, but as soon as you feel it, it'll tell all sins. And then that's why we put a contrasting color primer on something, like silver dope or gray primer. Some guys like to use clear dope and they'll tint it with something so that way they can cheat. And there are a few ways of cheating this, but we won't get into them. You need that contrasting color, and you're working on averaging out your senses. And you're trying to bring everything tight and into one where everything agrees with each other. So, all right, we've sanded it. So when we look at the side, and here's our fuselage side. Now we're actually looking at it dead on. Our dope has been sanded all nice and flat. And we'll put because you will see sand scratches. It makes it nice and easy. So we'll say, all right, so we see all our sand scratches, but then you might see some big crazy area where the primer just hasn't sanded away. That's fine. First thing, look at it. Is it really deep? If it's really deep, and when you really start looking at it and feeling it, man, it feels really deep, put some filler over it. Just use some Aerofill, Superfill. Some guys don't like Bondo. Some guys don't like Spackle, Evercoat. There's all sorts of products that work really good. Most guys are going to tell you to use Superfill. Nothing wrong with it. It's just kind of expensive and it takes 8 hours for it to dry. So you'll do that right before you go to bed or go to work or something like that. But if it's not really that deep and it just looks like a gentle error, just thickness of a few coats of paint, go ahead and just spray just this area. All right, give it, say, 2 or 3 coats of sprayed on silver dope just right there, and then because you're probably still gonna have a lot of errors elsewhere on the plane. Then give the whole plane another coat. Sand it out again. When we're sanding this, I believe earlier, all prep work is 320 grit. Start on a piece of paper. Sanding the wood, sanding your first initial coats of dope, that's all 320 grit. When we get to this point, some guys still like to use 320 grit. I prefer to use on the very first sanding of the tissue and dope that I laid on, the first 3 coats, I'll use 320 grit. Just to knock all that, because you're still roughing it in. The next 3, I'll use probably 400 or 500, and I stick with that for a while. So when we're sanding the primer, only 500 or finer. It's getting scary here because ideally all you're doing is filling sand scratches from here on out. The coarser the grit, the deeper the scratch, the more material, the heavier it is, and it just turns into a big circle. So primer or silver. $500. And do it wet. One, it makes the sandpaper actually behave like it's coarser than it really is, and it'll last longer because there's lubricant in the cut. But it's also flushing the chip out of the cut as well, which is what helps the paper last longer, just cleaning it out. So once we got that primer on there, so we got our tissue, we've got that nice tight 3 coats that we sanded on before, or I'm sorry, 3 coats sand, 3 coats, all of that. That's the tissue in those 3 coats. Then we sprayed on our silver or primer, whatever the case may be, and it looks like that. We sand it out. Ideally, this is what we have here. We've got our our wood and our surfacing dope, our rough surfacing dope. We've got our tissue and our filling dope in there. And we've got our primer surfacer here filling everything in. So we zoom in on this, and we love to zoom. This is the tissue and the dope surfacing layer. And then we've got this really ever so thin silver. Your last coat of silver that you spray on, you can brush it on too, but I prefer to spray, that you spray on should look perfect. It shouldn't have any dark or light spots. It should all be one even color. if you can see an error in the silver, you're going to see the error in your finish. If you can feel it, you're definitely going to see it. But I'm just speaking of small color mismatches. You might have an area where, let's say, it's super dark, and right next to it is an area that's super light. Well, this super dark area is probably an area where everything is collected down in a low spot, and the super light area is where it should look okay. You'll see that if you spray a color over top. White might hide it. White hides a lot of sins. That's the body man, just common knowledge. White's the easiest to paint. Black is the hardest to paint because black shows everything. At that point, you might be trying to decide on maybe trying to cheat your paint scheme a little bit. At this point, you should probably already have a really good idea of how you're going to paint it. And the next step of this video is going to be laying out your paint scheme. That's why you see prints under here. I like to just draw out my paint scheme right on the prints, and it gives you real clear-cut ideas of what's going on and helps you get your proportions right here and there for different, be it text or graphics or where you want a paint line, whatever. So we sanded all this out with 500 wet. It's gorgeous. This thing is glass flat. The only way to get that mirror shine is to have it glass flat, and that it has to do with optics. If we got a bunch of rough edges all around here, we get light beams coming in like this. They'll just scatter off every little edge, and that's why paint dulls over time. We paint on your car, it dulls over time because everything in the environment etches it slowly, be it salt spray, sand spray from the road, pollution settles down on it, eats a little divot in your clear coat, bird droppings, your carver got egged, that stains it. The only way to get a nice, deep, clear shine is to make sure that it's glass flat. So when it comes in, it goes right out. Angle of incidence equals angle of reflection. And then if you wind up having these guys here, the light just kind of fans out and blurs out. Clear as mud? Okay. We got that, and then our color coats from here on out, man, I'm telling you, your color coats. So here's our primer. Now we're doing our color coats. As you spray them on, if you have good gun control, you're thinned correctly, all that, you should be able to lay on each coat just as a small skim coating like that. All right. Now, for one color, this works great. If we want to do a bunch of colors, we want to make a really cool paint scheme, well, everybody's first instinct is, well, you spray light to dark, and then you just add stuff on top of it. So, we sprayed a red, and let's say we want maybe some bars and stars on this, so then over here, we sprayed some white for the bar, and then we want maybe it was blue or red for the bar, whatever, and then we want white for the star. Well, all this extra stuff right here, these two layers, that's added weight. Because what you're going to wind up doing in the end, when you go to clear this, you're going to feel all those little edges from your paint, and you're not going to want to feel them. You're going to want this thing to be super smooth. So what winds up happening is, I'm going to grab another marker here. Someone will sit there, you're running your hand down, and you're like, ooh, as it goes up each of those layers, like, I'll bury it in clear. Here's your clear coat. Well, now there's all this stuff in here. This is all useless as well, That's weight too. And you sit there and you think to yourself, well, this stuff doesn't really weigh much per, we'll say cc or milliliter or fluid ounce, whatever. Well, true, it doesn't, but you're covering a huge area And that huge area requires a large volume, and more volume is more weight. So what do we do here instead? It's called backmasking. In a perfect world, the way you're going to be able to do this, we got our primer, and we got our base color. Alright? We mask to right here. Alright? And you lay down a piece of tape and you mask everything off back here. We're only going to spray color here. Okay, well, now we need our second color. So we spray that. We have masked everything off over here, and we mask off all the way over there. And then, excuse me, finally, the third color goes right there. Same deal, you know, we mask everything off there if we have to, and we mask everything off over here. Well, why did we do this? Well, that comes into, we run our hand over it. You might feel a little tiny bump between each color where your tape was. That goes away with practice and also knowing how to help. You know, you scrape with a credit card when you know, you first take the tape off. You take the tape off not right after you spray it, but say like an hour or two after you spray, and you lay the tape down and kind of drag it back so it acts like its own little razor blade. It'll help the paint melt down into itself. So that way, new drawing, we've got that. Then we've got our color coat, number 1. Our second color, and finally our third color. Then when we go to lay this clear on, same thing. It's nice, tight, and flat, and there's an absolute minimum film build. That is orders of magnitude lighter than this, especially when you go over an entire plane. Now, if you've got just one small little tiny graphic off to the side, or you forgot to do your AMA numbers and you got to do them right at the very end, it is what it is. Would I go through and resand an entire wing panel just to put numbers on it or something? No, I would put them on, and it is what it is. You suck it up, you deal with it, you learn. Next time around, you do it right. End of story. But if you plan ahead and you get everything done, and I'll show you planning ahead when we go to design our paint scheme, it helps so much more. You're not sitting there, you know, after you spray the color, ah, man, my canopy was supposed to be the same color as this, or oh man, I forgot a wheel pant, it was supposed to match my rudder. It gets rid of that, so that way each time before you go spray, you have a plan and you get through it. Now, the final step. For a sport plane, you're never going to worry about this, but unless you want to, if you're going into contests, yeah, you're going to worry about this part. If you want to make it shiny. Now, if you use flattener in your clear dope, you know, say you're doing a warbird and you want it flat, don't do this step, because this step will change the gloss of the matte finish. If any of you have a matte motorcycle or a matte car, things like that, you know you're stuck not being able to fix scratches or wax it, or you can put some ceramic type paint seal on it, but that's about it. Because anytime you do anything to the clear coat with a matte, you change how the light gets into it and the light gets out of it. And that can cause what appear to be mismatches all over the place, and when it's not, it's just you haven't equally rubbed or sanded or done this or that or whatever to anything. So we've got our clear coat, but even with the finest spray equipment, there's always going to be a little bit of a ripple to it. Even on, I don't care, go up to a brand new Mercedes, BMW, any Cadillac, any high-end car, you go into it, you see that just kind of waviness to the paint, or maybe even little kind of gentle rings all over the place. You know, when it's really bad, it's called orange peel because it looks and feels like the surface of an orange. But if you really, especially black cars, go get right on top of a black car and you will see it so easy. Just all these minor little errors in the paint. And it's from the way that it comes out of the gun. You know, you've got an HVLP gun or any spray gun. You know, they all look pretty much the same. They function differently. That's totally other topic. But, you know, air shoots out of here. And then paint comes through the middle in this tight little stream, and then the air mates go fan out and creates little droplets all over the place. All right, these little droplets are what get put onto the surface and build up your finish. Well, we got to get rid of these because again, we want that nice show car. Flying buddy of mine calls it the good guys finish. You know, old hot rod type stuff. The only way to do that, again, because these little ripples, when you have a light beam come down and hit a ripple, you know, it's going to go through it. It's going to, the ripple itself is going to deflect light out, but even when it goes through it, hits the paint underneath, turns around, comes back up, well, it acts like a prism, and it spreads your light out again. So it's getting a double whammy on this. And that's what just gives it, it'll look nice, but as soon as you start sanding it out, you buff out that little tiny portion, all of a sudden it looks like a sheet of glass. Because if we have our nice flat surface, the light will come down, it'll hit it, it'll come back out. Again, angle of incidence, angle of reflection from high school physics. And on top of it, you know, it does bend when it passes through, you know, the whole properties of a prism. But, you know, and when it comes back out from hitting that surface, it's going to maintain a truer course. And that's what gives you that sheet of glass. That's like you can see yourself a mile away in the paint. And you can sit there and hold it up and candle it like a mirror and see reflections in it. This is what gives you that, not this. So how do we do that? More sanding. So what we're trying to do is, you know, we got our wavy surface. We need to knock this off to make our nice flat line. Try not to break through the clear in any spots. If you do, stop in that area as soon as you break through. Spray some more clear dope on it and figure out a way to kind of spread it out maybe. Or, I mean, it's going to happen on an edge easier than anywhere else. You probably won't break through in the middle of the panel. But, you know, all these little corners or anywhere that's hard compared to an area that's soft, you'll break through a lot easier. You just got to take your time. At this point, if you want to take your finish this far, I haven't decided how far we're going to take this one yet. Whether it's just going to be a really cool looking sport plane or if I want this thing to look like a museum piece. I haven't gotten that far yet. It'll probably just be a sport plane. But we got to get to how do we do this? We sand again. The absolute maximum coarsest paper you're going to want to use here is 1200 grit. Start there. And because again, I mean, you're really not doing much of anything. You're wanting just this nice flat surface. You're just trying to knock off these little mountaintops. That's why you don't need very coarse paper. And this is done wet. Soap and water. Some guys will use just water. Some guys will use wax and grease remover to sand with. If you want to use wax and grease remover to sand with and do it, go ahead. It costs a fortune. I'm not out here to spend a fortune. The soap and the water, the soap acts as a heavier duty lubricant than just the water. And the water is acting just to flush the cut. So you're using this compound to help you out. You've got lubricant, flushing agent, and that's going to help this 1200 grit last a lot longer. You can do it dry if you want, but it means swipe, 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 oh, done. Swipe, 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 done. As opposed to this where, you know, you might be able to do, 3 or 4 wing bays or an entire rudder half, things like that with one little piece. So now we went through and we've sanded it, we've gotten all of our little high tops off, but the whole thing is dull. The whole plane is dull. Why did the plane get dull? I just spent hours and hours and hours sanding this. Well, it's because when you zoom into it, even though you've knocked it down, we got these itty bitty little tiny itty bitty scratches all over the place on it. And that's making the light come in and reflect off and dull out. You know you're done wet sanding your clear coat when the whole thing is even. The dull across the whole plane is even. There's not one spot that looks a little more dull than the other spot, excepting for colors, because colors can change how the way it looks. But common sense plays in a lot here. If you see one spot that's still shiny and another spot that's dull, well, you never sanded the shiny spot. Or maybe it's a low spot that you need to sit there and kind of analyze, man, did I really miss something here? Now I got to go back down through 3 coats of paint, 4 coats, 5 coats of paint to fix this? Or do I live with it? Okay. Question for you. Ride your own ride. But we got these. So now we use buffing compound. It's a liquid. Don't use the coarsest of the coarse buffing compounds that you'll find in automotive stores. The automotive buffing compounds work great. Some guys swear silver polish works great. You watch old Windy videos. He was a Gorham's guy through and through. But you can use automotive polishing and buffing compounds. And what you're going to do is you're just going to put it on a rag just a little bit and try a small area on the bottom side that's solid first. Like the bottom of your fuse, or maybe, on a flight streak, this is all sheeted right here on the bottom side. Try a little spot right there on the leading edge or on the sheeting, and just try and figure out your motion on how to go through it. And there's a rough, medium, and fine process to this too. Each time you're in succession, you're getting rid of these little marks. And hopefully at the end, all you might have in some places are maybe a swirl mark or something like that. But the whole plane is now glass smooth. It looks super shiny. It looks great. You can see yourself in it a mile away. Your dog comes over, starts barking at themselves because they see themselves in the plane like a mirror. This thing is gorgeous. Well, now what do you do? Let it gas off for a little while. This is lacquer. You put reducer in it. It takes a while for it to really kind of harden and get satisfied with itself. If you're going to a contest, well, let it sit for a few weeks, wax it, man, it'll look beautiful. You're doing a sport plane, go fly it. It's fine. We'll let it set up for a week and go fly. Always want to let dope dry at least a week before you're going to expose it to anything fuel related. That's really covering 101. Now, why did I say earlier circling back between film and tissue? Why do people say that film is faster? No sanding. Notice I brought up sanding a lot during this. At this point in your project, there should never be a time sandpaper is not in your hand. I mean, you're always going around, you're finding a little edge, and I can feel just a little nicer, this, that, or then you're letting coats dry, and then you sand them out, and then more coats, and then you're also waiting a long time here too. Now, I'll usually when brushing on, I'll usually wait about 2 hours each coat to let them flash off, so you put them on really thick. When you're spraying per color, now you thin coats, let it flash for 15 or 20 minutes, put on another coat, flash another coat if you have to. Brodac dopes cover really nicely. So it's usually 2 coats. You might have to put a third on. Whites can get kind of weird, but that's the same for any brand of paint. Painting white just sucks. So there's a lot of waiting in tissue. But when you actually get moving through the tissue, other than the waiting, it's actually quite quick. Edge work is real easy. You come around a leading edge, and you're laying your tissue down, and you're not going to try and cover this whole thing in one continuous piece. You're going to do the bottom side, you're going to do the top side. So as you're putting this on, when you hit the point where you're happy with where it finished on the leading edge, I'll usually go down just a little bit past center, and then the bottom side will wind up coming up a little bit past center, just because fingers are always there when the guy's holding your plane for launching. What you do is you just sand it. You take a piece of sandpaper right against the edge, and what happens is the very end of, let's zoom in even tighter, and we got the paper, the edge frays out and feathers down really nice and easy, and you won't even feel it once you trim it with the sandpaper. With film, there's no such thing as feathering with film. And you got your leading edge here. Again, whether you cover the top first or the bottom first, it doesn't matter. You're going to wind up with this anyways. I would always say start at the bottom. So that's the way I'll draw it. Because, we got this bottom piece on here. There's a hard edge right there from the edge of the covering where you went through and you slid it with a razor blade. And then when you put your top one on, you're never going to get them to butt up nice and straight next to each other, so you always got to go over the top a little bit. You wind up with little bumps there, and then you got to seal them with polyurethane, this and that, and you always try to align your gaps so that the wind won't lift up on your covering. Get another color. And wind gets in there, I can try and pull it up. Fuel and oil can get in there, so if oil comes in down through the top like this, well, at least this way, and you're going to run off the top, as opposed to the other way where oil could get down between the sheets, especially if you don't seal the sheets. And something like polyurethane. There are some people where you are hard pressed to find a seam line, and they're just magicians with it. The vintage performance guys, that's not fair how good they are at film type coatings. And they're fast at it too. I can't do them to save them, like I said, so I don't play with them that much. I'll use the different sort of tissue and dope fabric type methods, fiberglass, tissue dope, things like that. But yeah, so we feathered that out, and then when we come up and do our bottom piece, we do the same thing. And it feathers out real nice and pretty too up there, and you can't even feel the gap between the two sheets because again the fibers let go and just kind of interlock and lay down. They just kind of melt away. When you do a patch, it's the same thing. You don't cut a square out to let's say you had a little hole right there. You don't cut a square with your scissors or razor blade to put in. You actually tear a square out. So it's got all these little rough edges, and you lay them down, and those edges feather out all by themselves and just kind of melt into the finish. It's really quite amazing. Maybe I'll poke a hole somewhere in it as I'm doing it and do a patch. I don't know yet. But, yeah, so that was Covering 101. What it is, let's review real quick. It makes it look pretty. We know that much because, again, something like this isn't going to fly real nice. They are pretty in their skeleton, but there's no structure there. It provides the whole outer structure to the plane. Also, as dope dries, it's all shrinking together. And as it's shrinking, it's tightening everything up. This is what I forgot. When the tissue paper has one really handy dandy super duper quality. When the tissue is dry, see, this is why we review, because we forget to add stuff. Alright, sorry about that, my battery died. Alright, so back to this. Alright, so when the tissue is dry, looks like this. Right before we go to lay this on whatever surface, no matter if it's sheeted or if it's an open bay, we're going to spritz this with water. We're not going to get this thing soaking wet. Spritz of water. We're not going to soak it, we're going to get it good and damp. What happens with that is the whole thing stretches out, not to scale. Alright, it's swelled up with water. And then when we put it down and we glue it all around the edges, the paper is essentially a memory material, if you want to think of it like that, and it'll go back down to its original shape. What does this do? Well, it tightens it, which is good, and it puts the entire surface. We got our wing panel here. All right, we've put it on wet, and now everything is getting drawn together. Paper's shrinking, and it has a grain. The grain is always in this direction. You always go span-wise, because it will shrink and stretch the most in this direction instead of against the grain. And then, hopefully it's good and tight now, but after we start putting dope on it, the dope's going to get inside of here. Use a bigger drawing to make life easier on itself. But the dope is also going to start pulling around too, and it will try to shrink in on itself. Again, making it tighter. More tension in the system, the whole thing gets a whole lot stronger once everything is all dried out. So that's how tissue shrinks as opposed to film, or we're using heat on the film coverings. You're relying on how wet it was first. If you make it too wet, you can get water down into the wood. It'll take forever to dry. But you just want it damp. You don't want it soaking wet. I'll spritz it out of a water bottle, lay a towel over top, press it down, and I mean, the tissue's wet, but it's not dripping like I just dunked it in the bathtub and then try to put it on. And that'll make more sense once we show it in another video. Oh, all right. Let's keep on going about this. So why were we doing this? I find another sheet. See, that jogged my memory. I got all distracted here. That's weird. Oh, all right. So looks pretty. It looks strong because everything's all tightened in and drawn itself together. Leveled out the grain of the wood. We leveled out the grain of the paper. We make it fuel proof. The sealing of open structures, again, all through here, this needs something over it to help increase the actual working area of the wing. That's what we're doing. We're just increasing the working area with the smallest weight penalty possible. You could carve out an airfoil exactly the same as this. You could carve it out of a solid piece of wood, but that wing's going to be so heavy compared to this. I mean, if you were to find a balsa sheet, the correct size for a wing or the right thickness, board, it wouldn't even be a sheet at that point, it'd be a board, and carve it down on anything except for like racers or maybe parts of your tail feathers, it's just too heavy. It's gonna generate the same amount of lift, but at that point then it's too heavy, so the thing won't fly. So we put all this on over the wing, so we get as little weight penalty as possible, but then this whole area starts doing stuff. And the same applies to if you have open tail structures or open fuselage structures. It's trying to make it as solid as possible and as light as possible. Air is lighter than wood. And then wood is lighter than the tissue and dope covering. Kind of start chasing yourself in a circle a little bit there. So dope is lacquer and shrinks. Talk about that. Swells with water. I was going through some notes here about things I wanted to go over with. You should have seen the notes. So I managed to thin this out quite a good bit for you guys. Excuse me. Oh, shrinks. How do we make it look? Other little things to watch out for to make it look good. We said we wanted this whole thing smooth, and of course we do. But how smooth is smooth? Well, I use my fingers, and just little things to look out for. We'll talk about the wing right now. You got your leading edge in this case. We got a leading edge, and then you've got your wing rib. It's going up here. We got a cutout for a spar. It goes back. You got some trailing edge sheeting in here. And of course, it's all mirrored on the bottom side. All right, well, when we zoom in on this stuff again, there's just so many possibilities of where there might just be just a little, it doesn't look right. This joint here, that joint, this joint, this joint, this joint, this joint, this joint. And on top of that, there might be little high spots all over. You just make it look pretty. When you're sitting here building, the first finish starts with the first couple of pieces that you glue together. Always keep the sandpaper right next to you, so when something doesn't line up quite right, as you're going through and checking it as you're assembling, that doesn't feel right. And eventually all those little they add up, and if you do it as you build, it doesn't feel so overwhelming trying to make this look pretty in the end. And again, the more accurate you cut stuff. Now, I cheated. This is a kit. It's laser cut. The vintage performance guys, their parts just fall out of the sheets. They're great. Other people make great laser cut kits too. Die crunched kits, from way back. If you got some hide in your stash, you wind up making half of these parts over again, which gets you good at prep for scratch building. When you build from scratch on plans, you're always changing things, moving around, and you get a lot of little goofy spots. You just take your time and you get each little spot at a time. And when right before we're getting ready to actually cover this, you just take your finger and you go up and down each rib individually. Oh, I don't like that. Oh, perfect. All right, next one. You go across the spar and it's like, there's a little corner of the spar I don't like. All right. And you break all these edges, again, for cover later on. If you go right up to a hard edge, if we're looking at the rib edge on, you sanded it, you made it look all nice and pretty. Well, and then when we put our tissue over the top, if we've got this hard edge here, it's always going to go down a little bit in the rib base, but we get this hard edge right here. Man, just one or two strokes of sandpaper, that's gone. Then you got a big edge here, and then you got to fix it and all that. But as you're making your final sanding, if you go through and you just break your edges, just wipe it with the sandpaper. I'll show you what I'm talking about in another part. When the tissue comes over and drops down, it's a lot softer of an edge in here. So when you're sitting there sanding, it just feels better, and you're less likely to break through. You can still do it really easy, especially if you're using light tissue. Medium's a little more forgiving, but always break your edges, and they feel better too on your fuselage itself. Going up over the top of your canopy. Your ply doublers here, all that. You want the thing to look smooth. You want the flow. When you're sitting there right before covering and even after covering, and it's all painted, and when you're sitting there cleaning it, and at the end of the day, it just feels good when you're doing it. Like when you're waxing your car, and man, you just get all of a sudden it's just slickered and snot. You can see yourself in it. It just feels that's you're going for the same thing. It's no different. You're just working with different materials instead of wax and paint. And now we're going to wood, tissue, and dope. All the same fundamentals still apply. So I think that's good. If you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments, or on the Control Line Facebook page. I'm one of the admin moderators on there. You can write questions on there, send me a message there. And next part of this video, this isn't gonna be one super long windy video, even though I apparently ramble on just like he did. We'll do this. We'll do a video on designing the paint scheme. We'll do a video on actually covering the model, and then we'll do a video of hopefully turning our idea of what the model should look like into actuality. I'll go over, I use a Cricut, but how to make paint masks, when to mask, how to back mask, how to do this. We'll go over all those little parts. And all these fundamentals will apply to anything. I don't care if you're going for a Scale Master ship, if you're trying to make a beautiful pattern ship, you just want a cool looking sport plane to show up with at the field, and all the guys go, oh man, that thing looks neat. And it's all in the fundamentals. It's all right there. And it's what you do with those fundamentals that helps you make really cool, unique projects. So, keep watching. Again, my name's TJ, and we'll keep learning together.